Workplace drama and toxic work culture, why it keeps happening, and how to break free. That's what we're talking about today. And so, if you've ever found yourself caught up in workplace drama, navigating office politics, dealing with a bad boss, or just the feeling of being exhausted by the emotional weight of work or your job, you're not alone. I've been there. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. The workplace drama isn't just a nuisance or something that's bugging you. It actually reveals something much deeper about your career and something much deeper that's happening in how you work. And so I want to dive into that today. Hi, I'm Trina Parham, and I am a career and leadership coach. And I help women who are mid career professionals who are at a career crossroads or at a dark place in their career to navigate it and find a path forward and to work more sustainably. And so that's what I do. I have been working and coaching women leaders for over 20 years in some capacity or another. And so that has led to the creation of my current business and what I do with women leaders. And so that's who I am, that's what I do. And tonight, like I said, we're talking about this workplace drama. And so there's a few points that we're going to cover. I think there really is, and the issue around workplace drama has to do with the much larger culture where you work, and so that really is what creates such a terrible place to work and creates all the drama in the first place. So yes, it's about the interactions that you have with a coworker, colleague, or a boss or something like that. But so much of it is about these larger systems that do influence how people behave at work. And so that's what I want to talk about, and I'm just going to give them to you now off the top. So, the toxic culture of overwork and extraction, and how a lot of these organizations and companies do extract from the people that work for them. Number two, when work becomes your identity, drama is inevitable. Number three, workplace drama isn't random, it's a pattern, and I'm going to tell you why that is. Not that you're to blame, but there is a pattern that you often will see with the type of drama that you deal with at work. And the real root of workplace conflict, which is power and control. And lastly, I'm going to dive into something in terms of how to deal with it that you might not have heard before or heard it in this context, and that is the descent of Inanna. And so Inanna is a Sumerian goddess. She's a Sumerian goddess of heaven and earth, or you might know her by her Egyptian counterpart, um, Ishtar. And so, what I have found in this work that I've been doing around dealing with this career crossroads, and when you're really in a career crisis and you're not sure which way to go, that there is a parallel to the story of Inanna and her descent to the underworld. And I'm going to tell you all about that story. So, you should know about me. I consider myself I do a lot of spirituality, spirit work in the workplace. So, in addition to very practical tools and strategies that I've learned, I have a master's in social work. So, I've been doing this work in workplace settings for a long time, in addition to the coaching and consulting I do. But there's also this very spiritual aspect to dealing with workplace drama. And I'm going to talk about that today as well, because I really think that's a connection that we're missing. So, um, if you find that this is something you want to go deeper with, I have a free workshop called The Career Descent. And if you go to trinaparham.com/start here, you can take that and go much deeper. But back to the topic at hand. So I want to start with the story. So years ago, I worked in city government, and while I was working in government, it was my boss's boss who had just who I didn't really get along with that well. And the thing is, I didn't really know him that well. But if you know anything about city government, there's a lot of allegiances and alliances and all sorts of things. And if you are perceived to have crossed that boundary in any way, it can be detrimental to your career. And I'll never forget one of the pieces of advice. I worked there almost a decade, and there was one piece of advice I got from someone who was in a senior position to me, and she said, "The same people you see on the way up are the same people you're going to see on the way down." And I thought that was really interesting that someone said that she said that to me. But anyway, so I was having an issue with my boss. Now, this boss of mine was a colleague at first. And when he and I worked together, I thought we actually had a pretty good relationship. I didn't know him that well, but anytime we had to work on projects together or do anything together, it was perfectly fine. And what ended up happening was our boss. So I worked in a position that had counterparts throughout the city. I live in New York City. And so what ended up happening was our boss left and nobody on the team wanted to take that position because that meant having to work at the central office and nobody wanted to work there. Everybody was in their own boroughs and working and doing their thing. And so nobody really wanted to take on that position. But this guy, he decided to do it. And so when he moved into the position, he became to me what seemed like a very different person. He got really aggressive and was trying to micromanage and didn't really know what he was talking about in certain aspects of my work. And so we just did not mesh with him in that position. It was like oil and water at some point. And it got really bad and it was less about the work and more about our relationship and how we just were not working well together. But interestingly, like I said, I worked in my own borough, so I didn't necessarily need to see him a lot, but it was like every communication with him turned into a big issue. And so I ended up we had like a citywide meeting, and his boss was there, who I had only ever met maybe once or twice. I didn't have to engage with him that much. But anyway, when after this meeting, my boss's boss asked, could he speak to me? And I said, sure. So we were sort of out in the hallway and we were starting to have this conversation, and he physically was trying to back me into a corner. So figuratively trying to back me into a corner and literally trying to back me into a corner. And he essentially was trying to get me to quit on behalf of my boss because my boss wanted me gone. But they couldn't fire me. They had no recourse or reason to fire me, but they were trying to push me out at the time. And I wasn't ready to leave, but I mean, when I tell you I was afraid, and I think this is fear is definitely something that can be used against you when you're dealing with workplace drama. And so I just remember I was so baffled why this man was treating me this way. I'm like, he didn't know anything about me, didn't know me other than whatever this guy said. And so after that, so he kept asking me questions like, aren't you ready to leave? Don't you want to quit? Aren't you, ready to move on from this job? And I'm like, no, no, I'm not. And they really made me very uncomfortable while I was there and in that position. And so I had a colleague who had been working for city government for a couple of decades by that point, and I explained to her what happened. And anytime you work in city government, you get these sort of idle threats, or not necessarily even idle threats, real threats. It could be, there's not necessarily a paper trail. It could just be a conversation that you've had with somebody. So anyway, I told her what happened, and she told me to document it, write everything down. This was much earlier in my career, and she told me to write everything down and send it to him in an email and ask him, say, hey, you need to respond to this. And she told me the people who to copy on the email. And so I sent him the email just enumerating everything that he did and that I didn't appreciate it, and how I felt threatened and all these things. And I copied his boss and a few other people on that email. And he called me after he got it, and he tried to say, oh, that's not what it was, that's not how it happened, and he would not respond to that email. I said, absolutely not. We are not going to have this conversation off the phone. I want a record of this. And he backed off and my boss backed off. But what was interesting about that time was, I mean, it took up so much space, it took up so much drama and in my mind. it just took up a lot of my time that I should have spent working. I was spending it, talking to colleagues, trying to navigate the situation, figuring out what I could do to protect myself and prevent myself from being fired. I wasn't in a union at the time, and so it was really difficult. And so I've encountered, you know, I've encountered many situations, a lot of workplace drama in various capacities, throughout my career. And I think that when I think about it, I try to think about why. Because my philosophy about work is people want to go to work, do their gig, and go home, right? So what is the reason for creating such drama? What is the reason for creating a place that makes people feel so uncomfortable? And that's what I've been thinking about a lot. And that's always what I think about. I think about what made him show up in the way that he did with me that day. What makes people, do the things that they do that creates such an uncomfortable situation for so many people. And not only that, but it's unnecessary. People just want to go to work, do what they have to do, take care of themselves and their families and leave. They don't want to deal with all this, but some people get really invested in all of this. And so I think one of the things that I learned and I think is really important when you're dealing with workplace drama is to put work in proper perspective to the rest of your life. And this is really important if you find yourself at a career crossroads or if you're at a dark place in your career, is that we, especially as a woman, if you're in a career or in a job where you worked really hard to be here, whether it's the education that you've had, this was the trajectory, this was the pinnacle of success, you're there, and this was the thing you said you always wanted to do. And then all this drama is happening, all this mayhem, all this consternation is happening, and it really becomes important because I remember when I was in that place and it was really difficult to deal with and to navigate, which is why I help folks through it now. But it's important to remember and put work in proper proportion to the rest of your life. And so, anyway, when you get to this position where you're really high up or you're in the job that you always dreamed that you would have, is it starts to take over. It really can take over your life to the point where, everything else in your life becomes, it really is dwarfed by work. And I think because of that, work in your mind becomes so incredibly important. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying work's not important. Work is important, and what you do and how you show up and all of that. But it doesn't require all of the mental gymnastics that you have to go through to be able to maintain. And I think that's part of it, is that feeling of, oh my goodness, am I going to lose my job, my livelihood, whatever it is? But there's a level deeper of, why is my dream not what I thought it was going to be? How did I end up here? How did my dream job, career path end up in this place? And when you have been working a while, when you're, in the middle of your career, but you worked 10, 15, 20 something years and you still got a while to go in terms of work, but you know that going to another job, like you've seen enough jobs or you've been working long enough to know that these dynamics show up in essentially every place. Maybe not as bad, which is a good thing, but this workplace drama, it shows up in so many different places. And I think when you get to the point when you reach a crossroads in your career, or you've reached, like I said, a really dark place and you want out, something has to change, you start to feel trapped, you need to get out. You have to find that pathway forward, but putting work in proper perspective makes that a lot easier. It gives work a lot less power over you. And so when someone says something, does something, sends an email, Slack message, whatever, that gets under your skin, you know that, okay, I have other things that I can focus on. This is not the end all be all, regardless of what happens in the situation. Because I think the work drama escalates in our minds when you put so much pressure on what happens, who said what, they did this and that, it's all of that. So so why does this keep happening? Why does this workplace drama keep happening? So again, the toxic culture of overwork and extraction. So, I worked in my very last job that I had before I started my company. Um, it was a place that had a culture of everybody working, well past, 5 or 6 o'clock. And if you were seen or if someone saw you, leaving at 5 o'clock, it could turn into a really big issue. And I remember, I remember one time I was a pretty new director. I worked in a previous position at that job, and then I moved into a director position. And there was another director who was always clocking my time, always trying to see when I was leaving, what I was doing. And my thing is, I'm leaving at 5 o'clock. Now, there were times that I had to stay late or I had to, I was, in a sprint on a project or something like that. But overall, I was not staying late because, quite frankly, I just had other things to do. And I was maximizing my time there during the day. And they only pay you so much. So it's like, no, I'm not staying till 7, 8 o'clock at night. Absolutely not. Every day, regularly, no. And I remember her, like, she asked me, like, or she didn't ask me directly. She said to someone else, well, Trina always leaves at 5 o'clock. And I'm like, and that's what I'm supposed to do. And it turned into this thing of it was a kind of place where busy work was rewarded, not being strategic, not, because my thing about work is always, I'm gonna find the shortest distance between 2 points every time. And it's going to be done well and it's going to be done effectively, but I don't like wasting time. I don't like wasting time when it comes to work. I want to get things done as efficiently as possible. And so no, I didn't want to sit in endless meetings and listen to all these things, like absolutely not. And so because of that, if there's a culture like that, it can create a lot of drama. And it's one of the also I think where people struggle is that a lot of these companies and organizations are extractive. And by that I mean they take so much out of you and away from you. And so when that happens, it makes people mad. It makes people angry when they know they're being extracted from, they're not being paid enough, or they feel like the next person is getting away with something. That's often how it feels. You feel like someone's getting, and I think that's how she might have felt when I think back to it. She might have felt like, oh, Trina's getting away with something. Instead of her realizing, oh, I can have a boundary around my time as well. It wasn't that. It was she's getting away with something. She's getting to do something that I can't do. Why am I doing all this work that she created for herself? And then starts to spin out, crash out, and start telling all these stories that really aren't true. But again, and as a director, as someone who does strategic planning work and things like that, a lot of that is in the culture. It's in the culture of a place where you work. And if a culture makes it okay or sets the precedent that the expectation is that you work, you know, 10, 12 hours every night. And it's like you're not working in a hospital, you're not, a crisis worker or something like that that requires those kind of hours. I think for me, particularly having worked in a it was a nonprofit where I worked, it just wasn't necessary. Those kind of hours, unless it was a sprint for a particular project or event of some kind, those kind of hours were not necessary. And the work we were doing showed. It didn't show that there was all this crazy time and dedication. And so the work that our teams produced was just triple the amount that it was. No, it was not happening. It was just being mired in paperwork and nonsense. But because people feel put out when someone stands up for themselves, has boundaries, that creates a lot of drama. Okay. Number two, so when work becomes your identity, drama is inevitable. Now, I see this with a lot of people, and I think this is one of the another cause of workplace drama is sort of like what I was talking about before. Work is all you know. You've spent a lot of time building up to this point, building up your career. But if you don't have other interests or you find that work often takes over your mind and your focus, that because you have such a vested interest in what happens, and not only vested interest in the general things that you should in your position, but you get so focused on the minute details, and the littlest thing that is off can really bother you and bug you and drive you nuts. And it's one of those things where and imagine a lot of people doing this in the same place. Imagine a lot of people in the same place where work has become their identity. Not who you are, not who you're being, not who you are in your personal life, but everything about you becomes where you work, what you do. And so, like I said, that the smallest things can really begin to annoy you. So every little thing, or you get into a row or something with another person, and it's like it can consume you. And I know I've been there where you can worry so much about an email or the pressure or the stress of something like that. It can really be intense. And I think if you're the kind of person that doesn't make work your entire identity and you're dealing with someone who does, it can seem there's a mismatch in terms of um, the amount of focus you're willing to give work and the amount of time you're willing to give to it. Now, it doesn't mean that either person isn't committed or isn't doing a good job. It just means that there's a mismatch. And usually, the person who makes work their identity makes everything hell for other people. And that's just how it is. And so, I think it's important to really examine if you find yourself, having made work your entire identity, you really have to ask yourself why. And I'm going to talk about this career descent in a little while. But when you start to realize that this is this is not what you thought it was, and you want out, you're looking for a different path, and you start to feel trapped by it, this is going to make a lot more sense, and you're going to want to do something different. Okay. So, thirdly, uh, the real root of workplace conflict and drama is power and control every time. And I think a lot about this, and I think this is where micromanagement comes in. And I think so many people are unhappy. I think it's pressure coming from so many different angles, right? I think the way that people are expected to work, particularly in the United States context, is a pressure cooker. And so when you are in a pressure cooker, people grab for power and control, and they often try to wield it against other people. Instead of trying to work cooperatively so that everyone can do well and succeed, it becomes this power and control dynamic that can create a really horrible work environment. And similar to this guy, the story that I mentioned earlier, it was about control. He wanted me to do what he thought I ought to do. He wanted me to move when he said move and how. And anytime you resist that and you stand up for yourself and you speak up for yourself to someone who feels like you shouldn't be able to do that, or why aren't you going along to get along, it's a problem. And so I I often ask people to figure out where are you not in control in the rest of your life. And I think when you're so I want to make sure I'm tying this into being at a crossroads in your career. And when you're at a dark place in your career, when you get to the place where you've been dealing with all these things and you have had enough, that is really the issue, because I find that when you are dealing with workplace drama, there's a there's a time in your career where you have the appetite for it. You have the appetite to push back, to fight back, to do all of these things. and you can take it. You can take it. You can take the complaint up with EEOC. You can talk to your boss. You can initiate an initiative to change things. You can go back and forth. You can go to conflict mediation. You can do all of these things. And I think those are important things to do because you shouldn't let someone just run you out of a job. And I think it's important to also understand that there is workplace drama everywhere you go, but it's not necessarily as extreme as it is in some places. It's more extreme in some places more than others. And I think you can have, a little bit of drama, or you can have drama that can really take over your life to the point where it makes you sick. You've got lawyers involved. I mean, it can run the gamut. And so when you find you, I think that is the problem with workplace drama is it really can make you sick. I will tell my burnout story at some other point, probably in another video. But and I think I have a video on my channel where I talk about what happened with me with burnout. But essentially, the short of it is my mom had passed away. I was dealing with a really bad knee injury, and I had a horrible experience with a boss who I did not get along with, and I had to file a formal complaint against. And let me tell you something, dealing with all of that nonsense at work on top of grief, on top of a physical, injury that wasn't healing properly. There were so many things. It was just taking over, and it was too much. It was too much. And so and so these are all the things, right? These are all the things that cause workplace drama. These are all the things that I'm just looking at my notes here. And why it keeps happening. So this is what I believe. This is my opinion, and people might feel differently, but this is what I've discovered. When there's a particular issue or drama that you experience in the workplace on a regular basis, if it keeps coming up, it's because there's something there for you to learn that you haven't quite learned or mastered yet. So, for example, if you find yourself always dealing with the same kind of personality in a job, like you find yourself you've had maybe 3 or 4 jobs, or maybe you've moved around departments or something like that, and you find yourself always dealing with a particular personality, someone who's a micromanager or something like that. I think that's a good example that a lot of people experience. There's something that life is asking you to do, to take a look at, so that you can do something different and that you can have a different experience. So it could be that maybe you need to confront the micromanager. Maybe you've never done that before, and you're like, "Hey, I want this person to back off," because it really is about a skill set that you develop and how you're going to communicate with people and how you want them to interact and engage with you. That's what it really is about. And so, going back to the example of this micromanager, you're in a situation where here you are with another micromanager, and it's like, okay, what can I do differently in this scenario that I haven't done before? Because you have to interrupt the record of how things have been going. And I find when you do that, when you take another tack, when you take another path in that scenario, that things do change. And whether that's because you know how to nip it in the bud, you know how to move through it a lot faster and a lot better and a lot easier. There's all sorts of reasons why, or maybe you've resolved something in yourself. And when you do that, I find that that particular work trauma will either go away, or it will become much, much easier for you to deal with. It won't bother you as much. That's what I found. So, think about it. Think about it for yourself. Is there a particular issue around workplace drama that you keep encountering no matter where you go? Or maybe you have an issue with someone that leaves the job and then another person comes in, and you have that same issue with somebody else. Take a look at that. That's really something that's an area for you to really delve into a little bit more. Okay. So when you are in the place of you've had enough, because I do think when you are mid-career and you've dealt enough with the drama, you need another way. It's not going to be another job. You need a third way. You need a third path out. You need another way of doing things. And what happens when it gets bad enough, when the workplace drama gets bad enough, you start questioning all sorts of things about who you are, what you want, and what you want next, and what you're capable of having next. And this is really important because you spent so much time building this career, building this opportunity, and maybe you're exactly where you thought you would be, but like I said, it's not what you thought it was. And so you start to question yourself. You start to question the path that you're on. You start to wonder, you might just want to run away from your job, run away from home. You have all these ideas of what you could possibly do because you've had enough. You've had enough. And I do ultimately think that you have to get out and find your third path. And by third path, I think it's an idea that I'm still working on and exploring, whether that is being an entrepreneur or consultant, whether that's taking a pivot with your content expertise. And this is something I see my clients do a lot where they love the content, they love their content expert, um, they love their industry, they love their content expertise, but they are in the wrong vehicle for the impact they want to make or for the work they want to do. And so I think when you found yourself on a path, it can be hard to discern and figure out, okay, where do I go from here? What do I do with all of this? And there's I want to put this in a spiritual context because this is what I experienced when you go through this enough times that you start questioning yourself and it feels like a dark night of the soul. It really does. It feels like and especially if you've gone through it enough, you get to the point where you start questioning things and you're feeling a misalignment with your values and where you work and what you're doing. I mean, it goes really deep. And at this point, I want to introduce you to the story of Inanna. And so Inanna is, as I said, she's an ancient Sumerian goddess of heaven and earth, or you might know her as Ishtar, her Egyptian name. And so I'll briefly tell you the story of Inanna. And so essentially, what happens with Inanna is her sister, things are sort of going along, and her sister Ereshkigal, who lives in the underworld, her husband dies. And Inanna decides that she wants to go and see her sister. And so just follow me here. And so now Inanna, being goddess of heaven and earth, she is adorned with all of the things, all of the trappings of being the goddess of heaven and earth. So she's got a crown and she's got a staff and a robe and jewels and bracelets and all these sorts of things. And so she goes to her father, Inki, to tell him whether that ask him for permission or really to say, hey, I want to go to the underworld. What do you think? And he's telling her, like, do not go. This is not a journey that you want to take. Don't do it. But Inanna feels really called and compelled to go to the underworld to see her sister. And Inanna tells her handmaiden, Ninshubur, that I'm going to take this descent to go see my sister. But if I'm not back in 3 days' time, send for me, send help. That essentially something has gone wrong, girl. Come find me. So, and with that, Inanna sets off for the underworld. Now, when Inanna is getting ready to take that descent, one of the things she realizes, okay, she has to pass through 7 gates to be able to get to the underworld. And at each gate, when she gets to the first gate, she realizes that, oh, she has to give something up to pass through. And so the first gate, she has to give away her crown. And each gate that she passes through, she has to give something up. And so she is disrobing and getting rid of her jewels and her staff and her crown and all of these trappings of her life in heaven and earth, of her position and her status in heaven and earth, to be able to go to the underworld to be with her sister. And when she gets to the underworld, when she gets to Ereshkigal, Ereshkigal essentially takes her life when she's down there. and she hangs her from a hook. And so Inanna is there, her corpse is hanging there, and Ereshkigal is there, and she's in mourning. Her husband has died, and she's in mourning, and she's wailing, and she's really sad. And after 3 days' time, Inanna's handmaiden realizes that she's not back, and so she goes to Inanna's father Inki to ask for help. And Inky decides to help her, and he fashions two little beings, almost like flies, from the dirt from underneath his nails, and tells them to go and fetch Inanna and bring her back. And so these beings are so small that they're able to slide through undetected through the gates to pass through to the underworld. And when they get there, they see that Ereshkigal is in deep mourning. And instead of trying to fix it or badger her too much about what's happening or anything like that, they see Inanna's corpse hanging, and they decide to sit with Ereshkigal. They sit with her in her mourning. They sit with her while she wails and while she cries. And when that has passed, that time has passed, and Ereshkigal comes back to herself, she tells these two little beings, essentially, thank you for being with me and staying with me and sitting with me. I want to offer you a gift. What I will give you whatever you ask. And they ask her to take Inanna's body back home. And Ereshkigal grants their wish. And these two little beings, they take Inanna back to heaven and earth where she is restored. Now, this, so just so you know, FYI, Ereshkigal and Inanna, they're sisters. They're two sides of the same coin. They're both you. And what I have found when you go through this process, when you go through these gates, when you go through this descent, we all go through it many times in many ways in our lives. Sometimes it's through a career, sometimes it's through the death of a loved one, but we take this descent and we get to our shadow selves, we get to the heart of the part of ourselves that maybe we haven't looked at, or maybe we haven't spent time with, or maybe we don't know. And when you are at a career crossroads, this is the path that you are on, especially if what you've done up until this point was being in a career that you thought was going to be one thing and you no longer want it. Because it makes you question all sorts of things about your identity, who you are, what you want, what you're about, and what's next. And it can be very scary to begin to unearth all of this. And so I came up with a framework called the gates, the journey through the gates framework. What and I started thinking about what are each of the things that you as a mid-career professional woman, and you're at this crossroads in your career and you're dealing with all this workplace drama and you've had enough. What is it that you realize? What is it that comes up for you when you go through each of these gates? And when you go through the first gate, you realize that titles and authority are not enough. And so you start to want things to change. And I want to tell you, if this is resonating with you, I want to encourage you to go deeper with this and watch my For Your Descent, Navigating Career Crisis and Transformation. And I'll put the link below this video, but you can also go to trinaparham.com/start here. And that's TRENIA Parham, PARHAM.com/start here. And I'm referring you to this workshop because I really dive deep into the Descent of Inanna and how that parallels to what you're experiencing in work and in your career and how you get out of it. And we because when you go through this descent and you go through this process, you deal with this workplace drama, you don't want to go back the way you came. You know, when you've seen it enough times, you don't want to deal with it anymore because there's only so much you can take, right? There's only so much you can take. There's only so much you want to deal with. And so in that free workshop, in that free class, I take you through that a lot more in depth. And so if this is, like I said, if this is resonating with you and you know, hey, this is what's happening in my career and I need to figure out a better way to deal and get out and to find my path forward, I encourage you to check it out. Gate number two, what you let go of is the disillusionment with money and external validation. And look, I can, each one of these are a video on its own, but I just want to give you the framework. And this is where you get to that moment when you're dealing with all the workplace drama, you start asking yourself about, well, how much money do I really need to live? And all the external validation and people hyping you up or people saying, "Oh my gosh, you're the best at this," or "You're the best at that." It becomes so much less important when you're dealing with this day in and day out. When you're dealing with all the stress and drama, when you're dealing with the stress of the drama from work, you start questioning yourself and asking yourself these things. At the third gate, the exhaustion of being the one who always holds everything together. Because you get to the point where you can't do it anymore. And this is another thing that you have to let go of. And at the fourth gate, the emotional toll of constant battles and defenses. You know, one of the things that I really got tired of was having to always be on the defense at work. You want to talk about workplace drama when it puts you into that place where you're always on the defense. You always feel like you have a target on your back and you're dealing with this drama day in and day out. I mean, it really can exhaust you. And having to be on and in that sort of fight, state all the time is not healthy. And it can really, that level of stress and anxiety can kill you. And the fifth gate is the crushing weight of overcommitment and excessive responsibility. So this is one of those things where you realize that you've been overcommitted to too many things, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that you get to this place with work where it's become everything, it's becoming your identity, and you give too much, like you are overcommitted. You do way more, and the level of responsibility that you have because you put work in this position in your life and it dwarfs everything else. It's one of those things that you have to learn to that you start to release really really naturally because you stop caring. You really get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And in gate 6, the damage caused by relentless self-criticism and perfectionism. And I think that's one of the things that when you're dealing with workplace drama, you begin to question yourself, especially if it keeps happening over and over again or with the same person, or regardless of how you try to resolve the situation, it keeps happening and you begin to question yourself, or you get into perfectionism mode and it's like, oh, how can I do this even better? Even though you're already doing, I'm sure your work is just fine, but you get really caught up in that. And then the seventh gate is the loss of identity tied to your career and external roles. So you start to ask yourself, if I'm not this, then what am I? And again, if this is something that you've worked really hard for, but you realize you no longer want it, I mean, it's a doozy. And it's why I do this work and why I think it's really important to work with this model. So that's that's what I wanted to say about the descent of Inanna and how passing through these gates and the things that you have to let go of when you're at a crossroads in your career, why it's so important to go a level deeper. These mythological stories, they have so many good lessons for us. And so I encourage you to sit with this and think about it. And like I said, definitely take the free career descent workshop if this is something that you want to hear and learn more about. And I'll wrap with just final thoughts here and the path forward. So, workplace drama is a symptom of larger systemic issues. And so, I want you to remember that, but you do have choices. You have choices around how you can stop engaging, around boundaries, around deciding what's truly worth your energy, essentially, and also deciding whether or not if you want to continue working the way that you've been and staying on the path that you're on. Because I think a big piece of this is there you start to see a misalignment not only with your job but maybe with your industry. And so there's a lot of questions that you have to wade through. And you begin to navigate your own career descent and needing to find a path forward because there is a way out. Anana made her way out. You will make your way out, but you don't go back to you don't go back in the way that you came. And I think that's important. When you start to strip away what you believe about work and your identity around work and what you think money and success and all of these things mean to you, and they start to change or iterate, and you want to move to the next phase of your life, um, this is these things really do change, you know? And so I encourage you to really think about these parallels for yourself. Think about the story of Inanna. And if you're at this career crossroads and you're dealing with workplace drama, reflect on the things that we've talked about today, and where do you find yourself? So when you think about these gates, is there a particular gate that you find yourself dealing with right now? When you think about the workplace drama that maybe you're in or that's around you, is there a place that, like, are you having one of these realizations? And if you do, like I said, the career descent free class that's on my website, I really encourage you to take it. Like I said, we go a lot deeper into some tools and techniques and things that will really help you get through this process. So that is what I wanted to cover today. Thank you so much for being here and watching. And please leave a comment and let me know if this is resonating with you, and like which gate do you find yourself at, and how are you coping with workplace drama. Like I said, feel free to definitely sign up for the career descent free class. And that's all. And